Bienvenue à notre discussion informelle entre Joni, Brennan et moi sur le rôle de la confiance numérique dans une économie numérique qui se transforme à grand V. First, let me introduce you to Joni Brennan. She's the president of Digital ID and Authentication Council of Canada, DIAC. She has more than 15 years of experience in digital identity, innovation, and standard development, so she is the expert. And she helps DIAC to fulfill its vision of unlocking interoperability of public and private sector capabilities through the establishment of an identity trust framework that will help grow Canada's economy. Pour ma part, je vais me présenter en français. J'ai un parcours un peu plus atypique. Je viens de joindre Lévio, qui est une firme de services conseils en affaires et technologies, qui touche à toutes les facettes de la transformation numérique. Mais juste avant, j'étais en politique pendant 5 ans. J'ai été adjointe députée au gouvernement du Québec, adjointe parlementaire au ministre de l'Économie et juste avant, j'étais, je pense en anglais, I think in English, j'étais directrice de cabinet du ministre Éric Kerr, dans le fond, la première année. Donc, le ministre de la Transformation numérique et de la Cybersécurité. J'ai pu être à l'avant-plan au balbutiement de ce ministère-là pour mettre en place toutes les politiques en matière de cybersécurité. So it will be a conversation between me and Joni. I'm gonna, we are in an era where digital transformation is rapidly reshaping our world. So it is imperative that we sit down together and we start to discuss about all the digital implication of, the transformation and the crucial importance of digital trust. We live in a world where everything around us is digitalized, so our personal information, financial transactions, social interaction, and even our identities. So, and you know a lot about that, Joni. So trust is the cornerstone of any relationship that we have in the world. It's a crucial element of digital economy. So the first question, Joni, for you, let me start with the most obvious question. What does digital trust mean in the digital economy?
Yeah, thanks, Joëlle, and thanks for that great introduction. It's so great to sit with you today and talk about these important issues. In terms of digital trust, I would call the digital trust a way of categorizing a set of capabilities. So digital trust includes identity verification for a person, for an organization. Can you guys hear me? Can you hear? Perfect. Okay, you never know because we don't. So identity verification for a person or an organization, how you have modern authentication, the resources that you can kind of access, all to help people and organizations to operate, to have and use tools like could be a digital credential, digital wallet, a network. So digital trust is really that total of how all of those capabilities work together. It's a set of capabilities.
And technically speaking, what digital trust means, like in terms of operations, what it really means, like.
Yeah, I think it's a good question on what does all of that actually mean, and also in terms of what digital trust means technically. I think a big challenge that we have in the space too is how do people recognize when something has digital trust, that a tool has been built in a way that they can have more trust, more confidence in its use. So technically speaking, what we'd want to see in digital trust is we'd want to see privacy protection principles are embedded. We'd want to see cybersecurity has been embedded by design. We'd want to see that there's accountability, meaning that an organization, it's great to see that an organization has certifications, that they've had some third parties that have verified the way their service is operating. We'd want to see transparency in how those services are operating. So are there policies clear to us in terms of how is data being used, for what purpose? Am I in control of that data? Do I have data portability with the system? So there are different operational characteristics that I think it's important for us as a community are easy to explain to people because people are diverse and they have different routes of maybe I trust more my university. Maybe another person trusts more the government. Maybe another person doesn't trust universities or government, but they trust the bank. So people have very diverse views in terms of who they trust for what purpose. So we have to be able to speak in very plain language, because ultimately what matters is that people will use these tools and that they're designed in ways that respect them and help organizations to get what they need to get done with cybersecurity, with privacy, with control of data.
Yeah, you're talking about privacy, cybersecurity. We can think about authentication, all the technologies that are implemented right now to help these organizations and governments to be more trusty. Do you think that they can keep up with the evolution of technology? I mean, because we want to trust them because they have our data. We make financial transactions with bank, and do you think, for example, that like the government can keep up with the evolution of the technology, and what are the challenges around that?
I think it's extremely challenging for government to keep up. Actually, I have a talk tomorrow where I will be premiering some information that's brand new, never been shared before, about this topic, building public trust. And I do think it's very difficult for governments to keep pace with modernization. Certainly difficult for governments to keep pace with modernization that's happening out in the private sector. I also think for all of us, it's the challenge of our time to have a clear way forward in how big technology is governed, governance around big platforms, around big technology providers. So I do think it's challenging for governments to keep pace. At the same time, I think that people in general, again, people are very diverse, and so I think that people don't always realize, or maybe sometimes they do realize, hey, government, you already have all of this information about me. Why are you asking me for it again? Speaking for myself, I immigrated to Canada, so I went through the immigration process with IRCC, very strong identity verification, but there were no modern tools and no policy support that I could have the authority to tell Immigration and Refugees Canada, okay, you've done all of this work. Now I want you to give all of this verification to the province that I'm moving to. So there were no technical tools to allow for that. There were no policy tools to allow for that. So we just didn't have that level of modernization. I think people expect that modernization. But again, with diversity, there might be a range. There are some areas of the population that say, hey, I need to talk to a person on a phone. I need to go into an office. And we always need to have those capabilities there. Other people, other demographics, just expect it to be there and expect it to be seamless and can't understand why we're making you answer questions over and over again. So keeping pace for government, I think, is a very difficult challenge. I know they're trying, but it's very hard, and collaboration is key.
Because in my point of view, digital trust, in the center of that is like, you want to trust someone because they have your data, and you want to make sure that they will protect. I want to make sure that the government will protect my data. So my trust is based on that. Mm-hmm. So that's why my question. And my second question, which is a bit more complex, mm-hmm. Who should be accountable for digital trust?
I love this question, right? Because I think digital trust and accountability has to be done as a village. And the accountability model, who's going to be accountable is going to be contextual. So it's going to depend how you interacted. I think this accountability question is really challenging for governments. I think that there is a underlying question around, does government have a duty, or do I have the right that the information that I have in an identification card, whether that's provincial, like a driver's license, or whether that's federal, like a passport, is it government's responsibility to make that data available to me in usable formats? Do I have a right to have that data in digital usable formats? I don't think we've actually written that down. It's kind of it's a complementary tool for privacy and data protection modernization. That the question of, do people have the right to have control of that data? Does government have a duty to give them that data? Because in fact, if I think all of us think about our government issued identification cards, 8 out of 10 times we're using them to board a plane, to rent a car, to go into a bank. We're very rarely using those cards to actually speak to government. So I think that accountability question, I think there is fear and uncertainty around who is responsible, because certainly I could take my passport and I could make paper copies of it and post it to every wall in this room. Who would be accountable in that case? I think I would be, because that's not a smart thing to do. But of course, it gets more complicated in digital. So I do think in terms of when we think about digital transformation and modernization, that is inclusive. We have to remember everybody has different roots of trust, different feelings for who they work with and who they trust. But also, there are different circumstances, and we don't have the policy model that defines the accountability for you being in control of data about you, and where and how you're protected, and when and how you're not protected. And I think that's an important missing piece of the puzzle.
Super interesting. I bring you on a connected subject, because we were talking about data. So we think about big data, AI, cybersecurity. It's all interconnected, I believe, because like big data, they feed the AI, and then they help develop new ways to attack also, but new ways to defend yourself in terms of cyber security. So can you tell me about more about how they all interact together?
Yeah, for sure. So it is, for me at least, fascinating to see the line. Being someone who's lived through the transformations, I remember very clearly the age of big data and kind of the privacy and data protection conversations in those contexts. Seeing that line move into the food that feeds AI and helps different AI models with their learning. So there is a straight line from. I was listening to a podcast related to kind of AI and next steps this morning, and one of the quotes was, "You get what you measure for." So the things that we have put into this system and what we measure for out of them are the results that we're going to see. And I think what that means is we really need to think about how AI moves forward. Every new technology has potential to be used in good ways that help society, but also to be used in ways that are bad for society as well. And thinking about AI models and at what they've learned and as they go forward, I mean, do you know that most medical testing for new drugs coming into the ecosystem previously were not tested on women? Because the quotes were, "Oh, hormonal changes, we couldn't get constant readings, we didn't know how they were going to behave." So many medicines that we have today were only tested on men. So the data set and what we know about those medicines is only based on the sample that they took, which was men. So thinking about that, which is terrible, right? We need to know how medicines behave in women as well. So if you think about AI and how AI goes forward, it is going to be limited by the information that goes into it, and it's going to take the information that goes into it. So if we think about the internet of today and leading up to today, in many places lacks a verification layer. We don't have an easy verification. Has this data been validated? The way that the data was validated, was it impartial? Were there funding models in place that might want to drive that data to be validated in a certain direction? I don't want to get into is something true or not, because it's a complicated question, but what were the principles for how that data was validated? So if we have an internet that is full of unvalidated information, and that information is getting fed into AI, then we need to be very careful with the things that we ask AI to put back out to us are not necessarily correct. And if we're talking about long language models, they're the thing that the model thinks we want to hear. What is the next predictable thing that we should hear? So there's a lot of power in this space, and I do think, possibly less so in Canada, but I came from the US where a lot of people didn't have health insurance. So if you think people already are in a position of vulnerability, don't have health insurance, maybe they can start to use AI to get some medical advice that they don't have access to a doctor. But gosh, I hope that information has been validated, because I don't want to see the outcomes when it hasn't and somebody does something medically because the information didn't have that verification layer at the bottom of it.
It seems to me that it's quite an issue in terms of trust. So would you say that AI is more like has a more positive impact on trust or a more negative impact on trust?
Yeah, I think I think that AI, again, like any technology, it's going to go both ways. Already, AI, I think it was February, in February of 2023, hackers were able to break long-standing authentication methods like verify by voice. Actually, this was a reporter was able to break verify by voice using using easily accessible, non-expensive voice replication, break into Lloyd's of London Bank. So already, AI has the capabilities. It's making the cost, the resources needed to break those tools much more accessible, lower barriers to entry. So we're going to see more and more typical methods of authentication or verification are going to be broken by AI. But also, now putting AI onto risk analytics and behavioral analytics, we're also able to spot anomalies faster at the same time. So, for all of us who are at a cybersecurity conference, I think we always live in a space of trying to be faster than the attackers and using tools in both directions.
Yeah, this morning I was on a private panel and we had that discussion. And with the issue is like to keep up, like on the technological development. So on the defense side, we need to be aware of that and use AI to be able to defend yourself and to evolve, to make the identification, authentication techniques evolve like as fast as like the hackers. So this is a big issue. So I'd like to talk about the social inclusion because it wasn't the title of our mini panel. So I think it's important because digital trust and the digital transformation like brings a lot of opportunities, but also many challenges in terms of diversity and social inclusion. So what would you say that how can it be positive in terms like for the social inclusion and foster that in Canada, for example?
Yeah, I think number one, I personally have seen over time, being in this space, we stopped counting at 20 years. We don't want to give too much age, so let's say 20 years. Being in this space for 20 years, I have seen more and more, just speaking for myself, more and more women participating in this in cybersecurity in all aspects. I think in my early days, more on the policy side, and now I'm seeing more women engineers. An American woman just won Nobel Peace Prize for her work in economics, and so that's fascinating work. I think you guys should read about that if you haven't. But there's a lot of drivers for that, and that's the complex issues around where and how more women show up. But number one, I think having more people of different backgrounds and different cultures and different experiences in the room is so important for the design, because we're going to have different experiences that are going to drive our design in different ways. In terms of what the output of social inclusion is, we have to make sure that as we go forward with these tools, we don't make any gaps wider that already exist today, and ideally that we close these gaps. First of all, quite often when I talk about digital identity or credentials or technology, sometimes I think the public or people think it's a 1 or a 0, it's Boolean, it's on or it's off. No, we're going to keep things like paper and cards and offices and phones, because when people move to digital who are comfortable, then the people who need the phones and the offices get better support. So that's going to help with inclusion from their side. In terms of, I have a great friend who had an accident a few years back, and he's a paraplegic now. So having the ability to prove yourself remotely, regardless of your mobility capabilities, to be able to be a part of the workforce, to be a part of society, to do those high-level transactions anywhere you are without needing to get into a car or get on a bus or move, ensuring that people who have accessibility challenges can participate in the ecosystem just like everyone else, truly important feature. I live in Vancouver in British Columbia. We have a very significant challenge with unhomed population, people with mental illnesses, and people with drug issues. Quite often, for the purpose of this, I'll put that as one group. Quite often in this group, people do need to access government services. They don't want to be identified, and they don't carry around cards, but they often do carry around mobile phones. So having a way for them, for this group, that they can prove that this is the same person, this is a person that does have access to these government support services, but don't necessarily are required to get verified down to holding they can't hold a driver's license, but they do have a mobile phone. Think about a family who is in need and wants to ride the bus and gets government support, but we don't want to make them show some sort of very visible, pink card, a family who needs support. We want to keep that, make sure people can access services with dignity to help them in their way forward, and that these solutions, that we have diversity in the room by design, and that we're not making any gaps bigger, and we're bringing more people into the ecosystem who might not actually be able to participate in it the way that it's built today.
So there's less discrimination in the digital world. So, yeah.
I think I hope for that, but I also don't believe in the techno idealism that the code will solve the problems of racism and discrimination.
I totally agree.
if it's the data in, the data out, and so if we have skewed data in one direction that may be biased, we're going to have that come out of the systems too. So I think it's something that we all have to have commitment and work together to go against those issues and to get to that place of impartiality where everybody is participating on their merits and their values.
I think that the question of social inclusion is also at the center of how government they want to offer their services, because at some points they want to digitalize their services. They want people to have access to services on their phone, but at the same time, many people like the elders or some people like that have less money or don't have access to a cell phone. I mean, the government needs to keep providing them with the services. So there are also a lot of challenges with digital economy. Like we just think about digital literacy. Like we think about SAC in Quebec. I mean, many people they needed to. Well, they should have, but they keep the offices open because many people they just don't know how to use it. They don't. So, can you tell me about the challenge and what government and the society should do about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we need. And this is something that I'll talk about in my talk tomorrow, I think we do need to mobilize on educating the public on these issues. I don't think the goal should be for all of us who have a duty and a responsibility to secure this ecosystem, to make it available. I don't think we should try to convince everyone that what we're doing is perfect. What we should do is educate them about what good design looks like and what they should be looking for and what kind of modernization is happening. I think a big education campaign has to get underway. I also think in terms of education, we have to meet people where they are. So one of the things that we're doing at DIAC is working to try to mobilize many different organizations, because just as an example, if a person who works for the government of Quebec will have a better idea of how to talk to their citizens and residents, the University of British Columbia will have a better idea about how to talk to students at University of British Columbia. So I think at the core, our education we have to go back to basics. What does authentication mean? Help people understand that. Help people understand what privacy protection looks like. Because we're so far out ahead. So having plain language to help people of all types, professionals, students, adults, and children, to have better understandings about how these systems work, how they don't, and what they should look for as good design is a foundation. And I don't think that we've done that collectively as society. I think we've kind of been pulled along by technology and algorithms, and this is not a good place to be. when the news was removed from, I live in British Columbia and we had a lot of fires. We have a lot of fires every year. I know you have fires in Quebec this year as well. But because of the federal policy and news being removed from Facebook, and because Facebook, because of their decisions as well, a lot of people in the northern regions in British Columbia couldn't get news about the fires and what to do. So people were, livid about why did the federal government make this decision? Why did Facebook do this? You know what keeps me up at night? Why are people so reliant on getting their news and their information from Facebook? I think that's a big problem. If the policy okay, Facebook okay, but the fact that the public doesn't know how to find information on the internet behind a firewall and can only do it through Facebook, that to me says we need a big education campaign for people about how to find information on the internet, how to know the difference between, how to be able to discern good information, misinformation, and disinformation. It's a village and we all need to work together on this.
Maybe the education system of all provinces should play a role too. I mean, the
100%.
kids should know more about that because they live on their cell phone.
Yes.
They don't understand all the implication of that in the digital trust. And
Yeah.
I think I have time for a last question for you. Do you have any actionable advice for the public and the private sector, or like what should people do right after this conference?
Yeah, so I think right after this conference immediately, I think you need to be looking inside of your organization in terms of how have you built in by design, how are you considering, how are you actively addressing diversity, equitability, and inclusion into your policies, into your design of your products and services. That's number one. I think number two, you should look for what types of partnerships you can make on your communications, how you're communicating, the work that you're doing, the value, the pain points that you're alleviating, and what it means for society and the economy. So look for partners to work together to help on this public education and awareness, whether we're educating students, whether we're educating my mom, or law societies and lawyers and notaries about, because they don't all understand these tools either. So look for opportunities to partner. DIAC is an organization that would love to work with you. One of our members, Levio, they're doing fantastic work in this space. So look for partners on how you can educate and tell the stories to your customers, your clients, and your partners.
Thank you so much, Joni, for your time. I think it was great. It's just we could continue talking about that like a couple of hours.
Yes.
I think it's just the beginning of a big issue. I think in our society, digital trust, because it's evolving. It's going to change a lot in the next decade. It's going to be increasingly important in our government decisions and in the society as well. So thank you so much.
Thank
and
you,
I have
Joëlle.
a special request. Can someone take a picture of us?
Oh, can someone take a picture of us? That's the request from the moderator. And
This is my request.
Mark. I think Mark says. And while that's happening, I just want to say, all of you, we're counting on all of you to continue this discussion in your organizations because it happens as a team. Thanks,
Merci
Mark.
beaucoup.
Merci beaucoup. So thank you for joining us and prioritizing your time. Keep it going in your organization, and we'll see you soon.
Merci infiniment.
Merci beaucoup.